talk about The Great Gatsby.
Good morning, and thank you for having me. My name is John Paul Teti. I'm a senior at DeMatha. I first read The Great Gatsby in my American literature class a few years ago, and it did not sit well with me. Even in the few years since then, though, Gatsby's cultural influence seems to have only grown, and this paper grew out of my effort to understand the book and to articulate why its popularity sort of bothers me. One of the common efforts of American high school education is to compel as many American adolescents as possible to read The Great Gatsby. Dutifully distributed to class after class, Gatsby is placed among the greats of American literature, one of the few texts we all must read, or else. As a result, most of us have probably heard the typical reaction to the book. Perhaps we have had it ourselves. This is boring, and I hate these characters. Faced with this complaint, good teachers typically respond that we do not have to like the characters, or that we are not supposed to like them, or any number of other thoughtful responses. With Gatsby, however, something else is going on. Now, an unfortunate side effect of Gatsby's standardization is that it has developed a default interpretation, which goes roughly like this. J. Gatsby vaguely represents the American dream, the green light that blinks on the end of Daisy's dock represents hope, or a hope, and Gatsby is better than the other characters, because he hopes while they do not. We should aspire to be like Gatsby. There is a crucial problem with this interpretation. Gatsby dies at the end of the book. This is no small point. Gatsby hopes against all odds that he will get Daisy and she will love him again, but through the very woman he hopes for, he gets killed. If The Great Gatsby tells us we should all hope like Gatsby does, the book is telling us that what we hope for will kill us, and we should hope for it anyway, or something similarly absurd. This seems unlikely. What, then, does Gatsby mean? To answer, consider who lives and who dies. There is a clear difference. The characters who die have initiative and try to take control of their lives, while the surviving characters are fundamentally passive. Let us begin with the survivors. First, there is Tom Buchanan. An excellent football player at Yale, Tom is, quote, one of those men who reaches such an excellence at 21 that everything afterwards savors of anticlimax. And he spends most of his life doing nothing. His idleness is used to mock him. In one of the more ironic scenes, for instance, Tom says that the Nordic races have done everything important that has happened in the world. While he says this, however, he and the others present sit, doing nothing, being brought food by their servants. The irony cannot be missed. Tom and the others are talking about how people who cannot eat without help are to thank for everything important. Next there is Daisy, the perfect wife for Tom, in that she is similarly idle. Early on, Jordan Baker tells her they should plan something. What do we plan, she asks. What do people plan? Worse, she wants others to aspire to idleness. She memorably says she hopes her daughter will be a fool, the best thing a girl can be in this world. Jordan Baker, who also survives, tells Nick she hates careless people, but by the end of the book, she too has revealed that she too cares about nothing, and Nick says he dislikes her for it. Speaking of Nick, we must consider him as well. Nick Carraway is surely one of the most unlikable narrators in all of literature. The critic Catherine Schultz wrote that in Nick's narration, Fitzgerald invented a new narrative mode, the first-person sanctimonious, and this sentiment is dead on. Nick introduces himself by explaining that, on his father's advice, he avoids judging people, but immediately adds that there comes a point when he has no choice but to do so, and proceeds to judge everyone in the book. What does he himself do? Very little. He has no goals, only an abstract sense that the bond business would be good for him, and he has no sense of who he is. What he does know is that the other characters in the book, except for Gatsby, are terrible. Nick does not make any of them look good. Nick's last name, Carraway, even sounds like it could be a synonym for careless. These characters all share a fundamentally passive nature. They are idle and bored. Consider then who does not make it out of Gatsby alive. Gatsby himself, Tom's mistress, Myrtle, and her husband, George. These three characters share precisely what the surviving characters lack, a sense of initiative and the will to make an effort. Gatsby works hard, albeit in an illegal trade, bootlegging, in order to get what he desperately wants, namely Daisy's love. George, upset that his wife has been cheating on him and believing his wife was killed by the man she had an affair with, attempts to punish the man he thinks responsible. Myrtle, a fierce woman, realizes she's in a broken marriage and attempts to get out of it. All of these people are brought to their end directly through their initiative. Gatsby gets Daisy, but as soon as he has her, she hits Myrtle, and as a result, George kills Gatsby. His death comes about because of his success. He wanted Daisy, gets her, and as a result, dies. Myrtle has been trapped in her house by her husband and attempts to literally escape her house and symbolically escape her terrible marriage. But in her moment of action, she runs into the road, gets hit by Daisy, and dies. And George, attempting to get revenge on the man who he believes killed his wife, kills Gatsby, then, out of guilt or hopelessness, shoots himself. Here, the symbolism could not be clearer. the very thing through which he gets what he wants, the gun he shoots Gatsby with, also kills him. This approach also allows us to easily explain one of Gatsby's more neglected symbols, the eyes of Dr. T.J. Eckelberg. What the huge eyes mean, if anything, is often unclear. Through this interpretation, though, it is actually quite obvious. Nick tells us they were placed there by an optometrist who has since moved away, leaving his eyes behind. The eyes, then, are the eyes of the watchers, the idol. They symbolize very directly that watching leads to survival. The doctor moves, but his eyes are still there, watching but unmoving, like the characters who survive the book. The famous final lines of the book are in a similar vein. Gatsby, quote, believed in the green light, the orgastic future, but that future, Nick tells us, quote, year by year recedes before us. He says that perhaps if we just run faster, stretch out our arms farther, than one fine morning, but then trails off, unpersuaded that any such goal can actually be reached. Finally, he famously concludes, we beat on, boats against the current, borne back ceaselessly into the past. This is a wonderfully vivid image, but it is also awfully dark. We strive and strive, but never get anywhere, like a boat pushing forward only to be knocked back immediately. The Great Gatsby, then, seems to say that responsibility and initiative lead to death, and that goals are unachievable. The only way to survive, in the view of Gatsby, is to abdicate any duties and to never try. This message is profoundly cynical and destructive. Understood properly, Gatsby is a book which encourages people to abandon their obligations. The students with the typical, this is boring, I hate this reaction are reacting properly, if inarticulately, to the total injustice of the book. This leads to some literary soul-searching. First of all, what does it say that The Great Gatsby is considered to be such a jewel of American literature? At the very least, it is extremely ironic. If there is a sacred idea in America, it is that we can all make a better life for ourselves and our children. Gatsby would have us believe instead that any such attempt will kill us, and that it is wiser not to try. How does this reflect America, let alone the American dream? Is the American spirit of risk-taking and exploration so obviously wrong that it is naive and childish to believe in it? If so, why teach literature, which is in no small part about learning what to care about and why? If apathy is the only way to survive, why care about a made-up story? It does not affect us. Is life in such a world even worth living? Is it even life? Assuming we do not say yes to this, we are forced to rethink The Great Gatsby. We must entertain the possibility that teaching Gatsby at the high school level in the manner it is currently taught is, frankly, pernicious. To teach people who are just learning what it means to be independent and responsible that responsibility itself is a fraud is not merely to abandon the goal of education, to train intelligent, thoughtful, moral, and responsible people, but to subvert it. This, of course, does not mean that the educators who have had their students read Gatsby are malicious or ignorant. There is something to be said for reading works that are beautifully written, even if they are morally bankrupt. But the impact of Gatsby, paired with works like The Catcher in the Rye, which are also fundamentally cynical, is to teach that effort and hard work are pointless, and that one should sit back and take it easy. In the cynical culture we live in, then, we must consider whether prudence calls us to retire Gatsby, at least for a while. For what is called for now is not the darkness and cynicism of Gatsby, but precisely the hope, wonder, and determination that Gatsby cynically and childishly mocks. Because the truth, finally, is that Gatsby has it exactly backwards. Effort and responsibility make one an adult. Selfish indifference is childish. It is the child who cannot care for himself and is not concerned for others. To think otherwise is what is truly naive.
Thanks to all the panelists. You guys did a great job. Technically, with this schedule, the time is up, but I would like to comment here. We didn't start until about 10:30. Is that